Hello, everyone. Welcome back, and thanks again for listening to my journey. This week, I'm going to focus on the importance of local systems. And as we turn our focus to something that should be at the center of every disaster management conversation, you'll be surprised to find out that sometimes it is not, sometimes unintentionally, sometimes intentionally. What I'll do is share with you a couple of reflections about what it means to lead with humility and prioritize local knowledge and capacity building. So too often in international context as well as domestic, actors arrive with resources, press releases, and prepackaged interventions. But as many of you may have experienced, the most successful disaster response efforts are those that are grounded in local realities, both from a governance perspective, the culture and lived experience of those individuals. I'll never forget being centered in Panama for the International Federation of Red Cross Red Crescent Societies and working in the Hurricane Dorian response in 2019, which impacted the Bahamas. International teams poured in with amazing intentions, but few had worked out in the out islands before. Certainly it's one thing to be in Nassau, the epicenter of the Bahamas, but so many of the communities that were most heavily impacted were outside of the major capital area. Those that didn't speak dialects, didn't understand land tenure issues, and assumed that handing out aid from helicopters was the best option were often fraught with, of course, disappointment when those interventions did not work. But local leaders, especially women-led groups and pastors, the faith community, had already mapped which families had stayed behind, which roads were passable by boat, and who needed medical evacuation. It was that local indigenous knowledge, in my case, standing from my position in Panama, 1,000 miles away. It was those local communities that had the local knowledge and wherewithal to really identify those in most need. They weren't waiting for orders, they were acting. They shifted the strategy to essentially incorporate local indigenous knowledge, which informed our response plan. So that pivot, letting local systems lead, really made all the difference. I'll never forget a lot of the Haitian communities that had found their way to the Bahamas over the last couple of decades. And working with local Haitian leaders, informal community leaders, was essential for us to essentially ensure that we were meeting the most vulnerable. So as you're thinking through this module, I encourage you to look at community-based solutions and concepts like community-based disaster reduction and local legitimacy. Ask yourself, are we building systems for communities or with them? The idea of for versus with is certainly prominent and something I often think about. And what assumptions do we carry out in our work, and how might they unintentionally undermine resilience? So at this point in the course, you've got a strong sense of the frameworks that coordinate and certainly drive emergency cycles of disaster response, recovery, mitigation, preparedness, etc. And I just encourage you to try to consider centering the voices that are often too marginalized in communities, because no matter how global your toolkit is, if your strategy doesn't work for the local community, it doesn't work at all. Thank you all for listening to my experiences, and I wish you the best.